Oh, let me recreate it in Facebook. There we go. And now we're live, I think. All right. I think we're live.
Okay.
Yeah, we go. Yeah. This is our I think fourth show. So
Excellent.
we're new to all of this. And Karine has left the show and to handle some personal items. I am doing this show, and I think we're going to share hosting amongst ourselves here at Interact. So I think, Michael, you knew Karine, or Karine brought you to my attention initially.
Correct. Yeah, I bumped into Karine over on a Slack channel some months ago when she was
Yeah.
looking for interesting guests, and I said, "I'll do it."
Cool.
There we are.
You must have felt extroverted that day, or been particularly brave as an introvert. Either way, nice to have you on the show. Today, we're going to talk about, and I was particularly interested in what you had said to Karine, which was we went freemium and went crazy. There was some hyper growth issues, and there's kind of the curse. There's good problems and there's bad problems, and
For sure.
this to me sounds like a good problem. It's a problem nonetheless. Yet I think if it's not managed well, and you could explain this more during the show today, but it could turn into a bad problem. And I think we'll go into some of the pitfalls there. But a little bit about you. Let me give you a proper Interact introduction. So you are now a product coach.
Yeah.
So you coach product managers, not products. You don't have one-on-one sessions with Slack, but you might have a one-on-one session with the product manager working on a Slack feature. And your background is pretty impressive. You were with T-Mobile, Qualcomm, Sony, and you also were a professor in the Seattle area for business schools, sounds like.
Yeah, still doing that.
Still doing that, yeah, nice.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's kind of hear from you, Michael.
Yeah, sure.
Tell us about what your journey was. How did you get here?
Yeah, so I'll compress the last 20 some odd years into maybe 20 some odd seconds if I can. But I went to engineering school, got my bachelor's and my master's in mechanical engineering at UCLA, and the plan always was for me to go into my family's business, which was commercial air conditioning. So I went, and I had been working summers there, and then I went to work there. After about 5 or 6 years there, I knew I wanted to go back part-time and get my MBA. So I went back to UCLA and was part of their fully employed MBA program, and was doing that over 3 years. And while I was in that program, I really was sort of exposed and opened up to all the other things that are out there in the world, career-wise, professional-wise, that I had not really looked for. It was also during .com boom, so everything cool was happening in tech, and I was really, pretty inspired and excited by it. Made the tough decision, left the family business, and then sort of figured out my way into product management. It was kind of a natural spot for me to get to based on my engineering and my business school now background, combined with doing a lot of different jobs and managing a lot of different aspects of the business when I was working for my dad. So I got into product management, which was great because I love it and I think it's an amazing job and an incredible career. And I had still having a very, very good career as a product manager and a product leader. In the last maybe 10 or so years, mostly being a product leader, so managing product managers and product management teams. I really, really love helping and coaching and guiding and mentoring the product managers on my team to be the best versions of themselves they can be. And so about a year and a half ago, when sort of an opportunity came up to kind of make a transition, I decided I wasn't going to continue looking for the next leadership role in a big company. I'd been doing that for a long time. I was going to strike out on my own and do what I love doing, which is helping product managers become great product managers. And so that's what I've been doing for the last year and a half. In parallel to that, because I love helping and coaching, and it's kind of teaching lends itself well into there. I was able to get myself some opportunities as an adjunct professor at University of Washington and Seattle University's business schools. So I teach strategy to undergrads and to graduate students at both those schools.
Nice.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. Yeah. By the way, are those the Warby Parkers? Because they look like my glasses.
I think we have the same glasses. Yes, I just got these about, I don't know, 3 months ago. Warby Parkers.
There you go. Good taste.
Likewise.
So we work with clients who often need to go through a monetization change, and they're thinking about how they charge, how much they charge, and their sales motion. And I can't think of anything more nerve-wracking than taking your sales motion and changing how your terms are, changing your tiers, changing how you do your trials, changing how long your trial is, giving something away for free. And you did this. So take me through a little bit about why, and this was at Here Technologies.
Correct.
When you're there. How did you arrive at a consensus to do something as drastic as make something for free?
Yeah. I would actually say that we got a sufficient consensus to make the move. I think we still had a lot of doubters. I would say about half the company was probably still sitting on the sidelines saying this is going to be a disaster because you're now giving away everything that we have of value for free. So we, for Here Technologies, main business has and still is automotive, and it's basically digital maps and car navigation systems. And so it's long-term lead times for sales cycles and sales motions with car OEMs. But the company was at that time really trying to transition into other places where they could deliver maps and location-based services and things like that. So we really built up our suite of APIs and SDKs and our whole sort of developer offering. And so we offered a 90-day free trial. And we learned, though, pretty early on that developers didn't like that. That's not how developers tend to work, because they'd want to try it out. And then, of course, somebody would have to get in touch with somebody at Here, and then they'd get a salesperson, and then they'd talk through the terms of that 90-day trial. Which services do you want to try? Okay, great. Oh, we don't include that one. Let me see what I can do. 3 months would go by back and forth with legal and contracts and procurement. And then finally, here you go. Here's your 90-day trial. By that time, the developer has, moved on past what their interest is. So developers want to get access to something quickly, easily, sort of instantly if they can. And they want to play around with it and test it out as they do. Like, they don't want to be time boxed. And so knowing all of that and kind of seeing what some other companies around us were doing, we knew we needed to go to a freemium offering. Give them something for free, essentially forever, but not make it so much that they can build a business off of it. And when they start to build a business off of it, they need to then, engage with us in some financial transaction.
Yeah.
So how did we do it? It was a lot of convincing. It was a lot of, persuasion and conviction and repeat the message over and over. We had a benefit, though. I mean, what really helped is the CEO was behind it. And so the CEO was behind it because he understood the value of developers. And so that was really what helped us drive it through to materialize.
So your ICP were developers themselves, were your, or at least your persona, your main persona, your user is the developer.
Yeah.
Were they also the buyer?
No, they're not. And that's the other thing, right? Is I mean, they might be at maybe that first payment tier because they might have access to a little budget or a corporate card if they wanted to put something on to kind of get some more. But the moment you're going to go into a real proper commercial tier, no, our buyers typically would be like head of engineering or, the CTO, CIO, SVP of engineering would be the actual buyer.
Yeah, right. So you have basically two main personas that you were communicating with, at least in your value proposition, right? You had the guy who's going to use it, the guy or gal who's going to use it day in and day out for their project, and the one who's got a budget to pay for it.
Yeah.
And this user persona, this developer persona, they were getting frustrated because it would take so long for them to get access to the configuration that they needed of the product.
Mhm.
This must have been going on for quite some time for you guys. At what point, or take me through like observation to decision point. Like you're seeing salespeople and configuration onboarding people struggle for months, maybe even years. At what point did you come along and say, this is a problem?
Yeah. So, in the spirit of transparency, it wasn't just me. There was a team of us, obviously, that was working on this. But nevertheless, um, I mean, here's how the way it played out really was, the CEO in trying to execute on the strategy and vision of expanding the breadth of the company to not just automotive but other industries and other segments, wanted us to focus on and rapidly grow our developer community. At that time, our developer community was very small, tens of thousands, if that many, and he wanted us to double it in a year. And sort of spoiler alert, we ended up successfully doubling it and then some 3 years running. So we ended up with 10 times growth over 3 years, 10x growth over 3 years. But to do that, I mean, we had a very kind of a steady curve, line of developer growth, but it wasn't at a pace that was doubling year over year at all. And so we needed to do something different. We knew that we needed to do something different. And so that's when, at that time, we were seeing incredible success from some companies that kind of have led the charge around product-led growth and freemium offerings. Companies like like Slack and Twilio and Dropbox and others and things like that, right? That we said, look, this is how we're going to get developers. We know developers want to access and use our services, but our service, what they were doing is if they couldn't get access to ours, they just go to Google and use Google's Maps and Google's APIs and Google services because they could get them immediately and start to use them. Ultimately, that's not what the company would want to have long term, just from customer and user and protection and privacy. But that's the quickest way the developer could get what they were doing done. So we knew we had to, if we wanted to grow developers to then ultimately grow sales, we knew we had to focus on that part of the whole long sales motion of that initial trial. How do we go from I have a need as a developer to I'm playing around with here's APIs. And so that's why we said, this 90-day trial, which time boxes them, plus the fact that it takes so long to get it all set up and going, is just untenable.
Yeah.
And so we said we needed to do something different.
Yeah. It sounds like what you had was an executive sponsor and a strategy.
Yeah.
That strategy led to smart decision making down the chain to say, okay, we have this goal, developers act like this. Our pricing model doesn't match how they act.
Right.
That's what we got to fix first. And then you did. So you basically took a 90-day trial and you made your product free. This is it. And as terrifying as that sounds, it sounds like it was a wild success because of different factors. And one of the things you said that was a challenge was when you double, triple, or quadruple your user base, it can be hard to find the real high value users, the real product qualified accounts inside of your system. How did you guys, and what advice might you have for other SaaS companies who have a high volume of users, but you know what, it's going to be 10 out of 10,000 that are going to be 80% of my revenue? How do I find them?
Yeah. And that was the philosophical shift that we understood inherently, but many of the people in the company just couldn't get their heads wrapped around because, they would look at the 98% of the people that you have that aren't using it or aren't paying us. And it's like, well, don't look at those. Let's find those 2% that we found, when they were just starting out and grew. So what ends up happening is, we launched Freemium. It was a orchestrated, choreographed launch, good go-to-market, support from kind of all the outbound communication sides of the business. And literally overnight, I mean, we saw, if you saw our line going up, we saw there was a bend. There was an inflection point at the moment we launched Freemium. The slope of that line increased and stayed positive. That new higher level slope for the next 3 years. And what I think, in hindsight, we suffered a little bit from the success of that, right? Because now we have a ton of developers and tons coming in constantly, signing up, using our services. We were ready and planning for all of the documentation and support and tutorial, and right, because now this community is sort of, now they're using your stuff, so they need to know how to use it, and how do I use these APIs, and what does this error mean, and why is this not returning the value I'm expecting, et cetera, et cetera. But you can't do that in a traditional, we're going to support one-on-one or with human beings, a customer support for all these customers that aren't paying you anything. So we did a ton of content creation, and we were doing live streams and videos and tutorials and articles and all these things. What you need to also do, and it seems, it sounds obvious sort of sitting on this side of it, but is you've got to make sure you're really, really precise and intentional with the instrumentation you put in. And what I mean by that is, it's really easy just to get tons and tons of data, right? Number of users and what they're using and which APIs and when they're using the API. But you'll get overwhelmed with that amount of data, and you don't know what to look at and what to do. So you've almost got to plan out, look, specifically, this is what we're expecting, the usage patterns. These are the things we want to look at specifically to prove hypotheses we have, and then prove those or disprove them and find something else. But be very deliberate and intentional with what you're instrumenting and what you're going to look at. And then you got to find those needles in the haystack, and they are there. But what's tricky is what's the leading indicator? That's the other thing you have to try to figure out is what's the, and in our case, it was typically just increased usage. Now, we had an issue, which we'll talk about in a minute, probably, about usage spread across different users in a company, which was difficult at times to measure. But, for example, we would suddenly see, wait a second, this customer is now suddenly, so our tier was this. You could use our APIs up to 250,000 API transaction calls per month for free, which sounds like a lot, but it's not enough in a location or mapping type of situation to really build a business. When you get above 250,000, we had a tier that took you up to 1 million. And then if you're going up above 1 million a month, you are now dealing with direct sales and an enterprise agreement. And so we saw some users going, up closer to the 250,000. We saw them flip to premium, where they were now paying us on a credit card $500 or so a month to get themselves up to 1 million. And we saw their usage growing. And it turns out, we did a little bit of digging around and inspection, that in this example, it was Domino's Pizza. And what it was is there was a couple of developers in one of their groups that was just playing around with some stuff, trying some things, saying, hey, what if we do this? What if we do that? They were experimenting. And so we contacted them and tried to understand what it was they were doing. And then ultimately a salesperson worked with them, sort of nurtured the account and moved them into an enterprise account, which is exactly how this model is supposed to work. So what do you need to do is you need to look for that. You need to know what you're going to measure. And you need to be able to try to identify the things that are leading indicators for where that usage is going to, what's an indicator that usage is likely to continue growing.
What kinds of tools do you use to do these measurements and analytics?
Yeah, I mean, we were using at the time, again, this is a few years back, we were using Amplitude, we were using Tableau. I'm probably missing a few that I don't even recall off the top of my head. But it wasn't anything, the tool isn't the trick, right? The trick is knowing how to use the tool, right? Or knowing kind of where to probe, where to look, and how to make it ultimately easy for non-technical users, for business users
Yeah.
to monitor and consume.
Did you know where you were going to be looking the day you turned on freemium?
No, I don't think we did. I mean,
Yeah.
no, we didn't. And I think the reason is
Mhm.
I'm gonna say the reason's probably threefold. One, I don't think we believed that it was gonna jump the way it did. We
Interesting.
hoped it would, but I think we were cautious. Two, we missed it. Now we miss it. We're dealing with everything else. We got to get it make sure it works. It's got to work day one. We got to make sure they get access to the APIs. We got to make sure the go-to-market's all set up. And you're dealing with 150 different things. We kind of missed, I think, really, really looking at that. And then
Yeah.
the third thing is, and our metric was grow developers.
Yeah.
So we focused on growing developers.
Yeah.
What we didn't sort of say is, okay, and then what's the next metric, right? Which
Yeah.
was grow developers to then figure out the high users to then grow them into customers. And so
Yeah.
that was
Yeah.
the part we tackled later, but it was much more difficult to do later than it would have been to do at the outset.
Yeah, I imagine so. I imagine the kind of chaos you had when you came to work that day, and you were looking at your usage stats, going, "What the?
Yeah,
What
I
do we do
mean,
now?"
yeah, and suddenly we see our numbers, our developer numbers just start to grow and grow and grow,
Yeah.
and even then, it wasn't necessarily right. It's once the developer numbers grow and then the usage numbers follow, right? Because they'll sign up and they'll do, in our situation, usage is tens of thousands of API transactions, right? 2 or 3 API transactions isn't anything. And so, you gotta have you get the developer, then you start to see some usage. So there's a lag in the time, but it's really critical that you sort of see that growth and you try to time it right. Um, because if you go in too soon, they're like, I just signed up. I'm not even using this stuff yet. They haven't had time to sort of
Yeah.
figure it out and play around with it and see what the value is. And if you're too late, then, maybe at this point now there's an SVP that's looking into where do we get location services. And now they're talking maybe to you, but also to your competitors.
So how did you figure out the sweet spot, the exact time you should be going for that upsell? What were
I,
those? Yeah.
I don't know that we did. I honestly don't know that we did. I think we we were learning as we were watching, right? So this example of Domino's, right? There was another example. It's funny, it's another food one, but I was looking at some reports and I saw a bunch of transactions, and it was coming from a Burger King domain. I was like, what is this? This is really strange. So I go and look, and as it turned out, if you went to burgerking.com and looked for a location, that wasn't using our stuff. But if you went to the HR part of burgerking.com where you were looking for a job and you said, I want to, work at a Burger King, and it would say, here are the locations where there's Burger Kings near you, you can go and apply for a job. That was using our APIs. And it
Interesting.
was this random, so it was a small group within a giant company that
Yeah.
was using our stuff. So I think what we learned was there wasn't a magic number at usage. What really it was a steady growth in usage.
A pattern of usage.
That was it, right?
Yeah.
Because if that to us signaled there are some developers there in that company playing around with our stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the time to get in there and not necessarily sell to them yet, but start to support them a
Mm-hmm.
little bit more directly.
Yeah.
And then ultimately, and help them get everything locked in, help them get to a place where they can maybe launch whatever it is they're doing commercially.
Mm-hmm.
And then that growth will ultimately lead to a big customer.
Yeah.
But it's that pattern that we eventually, I think, figured out was what we
Yeah.
needed to see.
So there's kind of a common trope these days that if it's free, it's not valued. and freemium is often looked down on as sort of, you're going to just devalue the any kind of benefit that your product is going to have. Or if you do something for free like Spotify, you're going to get a ton of ads until you buy them away. So there was a pretty big move over the last couple of years to get away from freemium models and into, well, at least you got to pay $1 or a really low entry with a red herring pricing model. What would you say to a SaaS company thinking about maybe exploring freemium pricing models who are concerned about that devaluation?
I think that there's no question that price signals value. I mean, that's well understood, and it's, tried and true research. But I think that offering it for free with very clear limitations, as long as you're still continuing to message, here's the value, here's where we differentiate from our competitors. And I think in a B2B space specifically, that's okay, because again, remember that users and buyers are going to be different typically in B2B. And so if your user, the initial developer who's going to try our stuff, if they think it's free, really, how good can it be? Okay, fine, I'll try it. And then, oh, wow, this is really good. And they've got all the stuff we need. And okay, great, because we are delivering high quality information, data, APIs, services. And then when you get to the sales motion later with the buyer, at that point, you're not talking about free anymore. So I think it's a risk, and it's something that half the company was convinced we were going to do, and tank the company with this. But I think that you just have to, make sure that, again, your messaging isn't suddenly, hey, we're free now. It's you can get into starting to use what we're doing for free, and here's ways in which you can upgrade and improve your experience. So I don't know if that really answers, but yeah, that's kind of the way we looked at it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I like what you said about there in B2B, you have multiple buyer personas.
Yeah.
And in a way, you're not giving everything away for free. You're just getting the user persona to what you would say in Reforge, to that aha moment. I see what the value could be. Now I know what they're actually talking about on that sales page.
Yeah, and ultimately what we were looking to do was to sort of completely flip the way the sales were done. So what we had done at that time until then was we identified all the big companies out there in the world that had a need for some sort of location services. We'd assign those all to different salespeople or account executives, and they'd go call on the CIO or the CTO. And they were already using, in many cases, Google, but other competitors as well. And we would go in there and try to unseat whoever the incumbent was by offering a better product at a better price, better value. And that's a long sales cycle, takes a lot of time, but it ultimately materializes if you can win the deal in a big deal. And what we were trying to do is say, okay, keep doing that, but there's another way to approach this, right? And the other way to approach this is, let's go in at the ground level. Let's go get those developers who are just now figuring out they need to start using location services and maps. Let's get them hooked on our services. Let's get them realizing what we can deliver. And as they grow in their usage, we are the incumbent now. And so we don't have to go in and try to sell to unseat the incumbent. Now we just have to go in and sell, you're using our stuff, you like our stuff, it's already embedded and built in within your systems. Now let's move you to a proper enterprise agreement. And so it becomes not just a lead, but a very, very warm lead that should be a much easier sale to close.
So I've seen with technical products like here technologies that you're either going after the developer user or the buyer, the executive sponsor, or the director manager. And the decision to do one or the other has a lot of strategic implications. It's how you're differentiated from your competition. It changes your voice of customer, your positioning on the website, even like what you guys did with your monetization model. This was like what you guys pulled off. Sounds like you didn't just make it for free. You in fact changed the go-to-market movement of the entire company. What were some of the other ramifications of going freemium inside the organization?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I don't think there was a single functional area of the company that wasn't impacted by this. And you sort of said it at the beginning, right? I mean, the decision to make to go this route, to make this change, very often is the right and best decision, but it's a big one, and you got to sort of be ready for what it entails. As you pointed out, our marketing, our positioning, our messaging had to change, right? No longer are we speaking to CTOs and CIOs; we're speaking to developers. Finance had to change the way they look at cost of sales and this idea that there's an enormous amount of usage that is being unpaid, but that's an investment. That's kind of the cost of the sale, as opposed to having a large direct sales force. Customer service, right? Because now you got to do a lot of customer support in a way that's scalable, since you're dealing with lots and lots and lots of developers. So you can't deal with them directly one-on-one, but you have to do lots of things like Stack Overflow and community and all that kind of stuff. And sales, and because sales now, the traditional sales of direct sales is, I have a quota, I have either a territory or a list of accounts, and that is, and look, salespeople, they are laser focused. You tell them what to do. Here's what they got to sell. Here's who you got to sell it to, and they'll go. And if you ask them to do anything that's kind of off of that track, the good salespeople will say, "Yeah, no, sorry, I'm focused here. Don't bother me with that." And so now you suddenly have this model where you're basically providing these, very, very strong leads that are, almost, to a point of converting to a sale, maybe some nurturing, then convert to a sale. But if it's not part of their list of accounts, or if it's not clear that it's within their territory, or if it's not clear that it's within the vertical that they're focusing on, or if it's not clear how they're going to get compensated on it, they won't pay attention to it. And so they had to change the way in which they look at it. So it touches everything, because the entire company has to shift the way it's thinking about prospects and customers and sales.
Sales are extremely incentive driven. How, and I imagine like that was probably where you started to make that change. If a salesperson has a territory and a commission and a base, and they only get paid on that territory on this list of target accounts, and then you're saying, well, now we're not doing that anymore.
Right.
I imagine you either lost some salespeople in the process, and as you're kind of restructuring, you also have to make sure they're getting paid the same, if not more, right? Because they're also very money oriented and reward based, as they should be. A good salesperson will be very motivated to make more money. Like specifically, what did you have to do inside your company to align the sales team with these product changes?
What we did was what we had intended to do. And I say that because a pandemic hit, and market forces changed, and strategy sort of changed. So we didn't necessarily, I think, and I've since left the company, sort of play this out all the way to its, I think, proper end.
Yeah.
But what we did was a sort of a stepwise approach, because it's not going to change instantly, right? Moment you go to freemium, yeah, great. We had now an acceleration of developers. But again, it took some time to go from, 25,000 developers to 500,000 developers over 3 years, or 50,000 to 500,000. That's what it was. And it's going to take time for them to warm up to be an actual legitimate, proper lead for a salesperson. So what we did was kind of not touch sales initially, but focus on, I mean, they were aware of what we were doing, and we talked to them about how to message, and suddenly they're trying to sell someone, and they're like, well, it's free over here. And, how do you handle that? But what we did was we used inside sales. We used our what we called lead development reps. These are sort of, lead generation, lead development, people who are sort of managing these leads through a funnel, as that sort of first line of initial customer touch point, initial outreach, initial sales, which does a few things. One is it solves that sort of cold start problem, because again, like you said, a salesperson is not going to be motivated unless there's, high likelihood of success and, proper compensation. So you've got to get the engine going. It also solved the issue of, us making sure this is working, and working out some of the kinks, and understanding kind of does it take to actually move a customer through that funnel, and increase their usage and those kinds of things. So that's how we handled it. Was we did it with a stepwise approach of using not our direct sales force initially, but our inside lead development team.
Kind of like a test, perhaps, before rolling it out big time. Yeah. We were talking before about metrics, and how maybe a month or two after you guys kicked this off, and you got inundated with a ton of data, and now you're asking yourselves, well, how do we find these people? There's so much going on. Did you follow any red herrings? In other words, did you make any mistakes with your assumptions about what were important or not important metrics?
Yeah, I think we, I'm trying to think if there was certain sort of data that we chased that turned out to be not valuable or not insightful. I think where we really struggled, so I don't think it's directly answering your question, but where we really struggled was in properly aggregating the data. So the issue we ran into, right, is, let's take this example of Domino's, right? There were 4 or 5 developers on this team. And so each of them signed up for a freemium account because they were all using stuff. And so an individual may not have looked like they were using a ton, but when you aggregate, now you saw what this team was doing.
I see.
So how do you connect those guys? Well, or gals. So the obvious way is, okay, if we all know they work at Domino's, that's one way. But again, that may be 5 people in 5 different departments. Okay. Well, how do you figure that out? Because again, you want to make the point of interest to getting access to the APIs, as easy as possible. And developers aren't going to, divulge a bunch of information, at least when they're just testing it, because they're like, I don't know, I'm going to dump this thing tomorrow if I don't like it. So you could ask for the company, they're not going to answer it. You can look at email address, but a lot of developers will sign up with a Gmail address typically on those initial things. So now, so we had millions of, or hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands of Gmail addresses, and I don't know, I can't connect them. So it was a real challenge. And it's funny, I was reflecting back, this is a challenge I think companies have been facing for a very long time. Many years ago at Sony, that was a real problem we were trying to challenge. Like, how do I know that customer who's over here in this part of the business buying a movie ticket for a Sony movie is that customer over here who just bought a new, Sony TV? And being able to connect that is really, really difficult. Now, if they use the same email address, okay, but more often than not, that's not the way it works. And so that was a real challenge for us. And so we tried to do a few things, and tried to look at maybe less about where the developer came from, but maybe where the API calls were coming from, right? So that starts to be, because you can't, but if they're running off of test environments, you don't quite see it. But that's how we found Domino's. That's how we found Burger King, because we started seeing calls coming from specifically those domains.
Mhm.
But that was a real challenge for us, and that's something that I would definitely advise companies to think about really seriously at the beginning, because that's going to be important.
Do you think the new data enrichment technologies that are coming out now, especially around AI, could have helped when you did that launch to figure out where people worked?
For sure. I mean, anything would have helped.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I think we're getting better at that. But we're not there yet still. I don't think any of these data enrichment technologies are, uh, uh, accurate enough to
Uh-huh.
really give you that information.
Yeah. Well, we're kind of in a retrospective part of the conversation. So let me ask you, looking back, how has this experience kind of shaped your philosophy, your coaching product people, your impacting strategy? How has this experience kind of impacted you as a product coach?
I think that's a really good question. I think so. I'm going to answer that in two steps. The
Mhm.
first thing is that I think that experience really crystallized for me, among other experiences previously in my career, but this was, one of a few moments in my career that really crystallized for me this idea of strategy. And so I'm now kind of getting into a little bit of my professor of strategy mode here. This idea that, ultimately strategy is a set of ideas and a playbook of how you're going to go to market, or drive your business in a way that is differentiated and you can push off from competition and do that. But a set of ideas is great. All of the magic happens in the execution,
Mm,
and getting everybody in the company, all the groups in the company, aligned around that vision and that execution. And so that, I think, was a really important learning for me, and sort of crystallizing of kind of my philosophy around strategy and business and execution. And then in terms of product coaching, that I think is where I push product managers to look at the bigger picture beyond just kind of their own product. Fortunately, most product managers want to do that, right? You get into product management really because you want to see a little bit of the bigger picture. You want to have influence in a wider span of the company.
mhm,
But I think that's where I think has influenced my coaching, is that it's important that product managers understand the strategy and the resulting sort of steps of execution to deliver.
mhm.
And if they don't see that logic from strategy to execution, to call it out and to really push back and say, I understand what you want to do, but I don't see the steps to get to there. And so, really sort of calling out some of that uh, disconnect that often happens in some of these companies.
I've heard strategy described as the heuristic you use to make every decision. Anytime you're at an inflection point, oh, should I do this feature or that feature? Should I charge this much or that much? Should I help this person or not help this person? All of those, uh, all of those go back to what's my strategy, um, and that strategy comes from a good leader, right? So your CEO at Here Technology said, okay, we want to be developer first. That goes into, it sounds
Yeah.
like, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and what one of the things I say a lot to my students is, you know, you can strategy isn't. I like that, this idea of like it's what everything, but a lot of times people say, what's a strategy? Well, here's my 48-page strategy slide deck.
Yeah.
Okay, that's probably not your strategy, right? That's a lot of other stuff around it, right? The strategy should be really simple,
Hmm.
really crisp, really clear. You may want to have many slides of evidence, and many slides of and how we're going to execute it. But the strategy itself is pretty simple. And ultimately, if you want to know what a company's strategy is from the outside, look at where they spend money, because strategy ultimately is where you spend your money. because I've been in companies that say, this is our strategy. And then they go and invest in different areas of the business. And it's like, saying what your strategy is doesn't mean that's what's going to happen. You've got to put money and resources into the places that are going to actually deliver on that.
Yeah.
And so look at what a company spends its money on. That's what their strategy is. Whether they say it or not, that's ultimately what they're doing.
Nice. Yeah, I like that. Also, what I hear you say is that if you're in product or in growth or customer support or wherever, ask yourself, do you know your company's strategy? And if you can't articulate that in a sentence or two, it's kind of up to you. Like I would almost say, like, go ask your manager, and if they don't know, go to your founder, go to your CEO. One of the things we've been doing in our team calls is I actually quiz my team on our strategy. So, so this is our strategy in a sentence, and everyone's like, yeah. Okay, here's a situation you find yourself in. You know, a client has asked for something that's not in the statement of work. Do you do it? And I challenge everyone individually to make that decision, like practice making that decision based on the strategy itself until it's like everyone knows what it is.
Yeah, and that's fantastic because ultimately, it's these, millions of little decisions made throughout a company that will determine kind of what it does. And we can say the strategy and we can send out slide decks and we can paint it up on the walls, but unless everybody's internalized it to make their decisions against it, it may not come to be.
I like where this conversation has wound up. We started off with a sort of a monetization approach, freemium, that people either love it or hate it, and we wound up with this discussion about the implications of strategy throughout an organization and clarity around why we do the things we do. We invest in the things we do. We put our time and energy in these things for a reason. I think it's so valuable now with shiny object syndrome, right? There's just so many possibilities, so many cool tools. Oh, why don't we load this thing in because it's so cool? Well, but our strategy is doing this, so maybe not, right? Yeah,
and freemium isn't a strategy. Freemium is a tactic to execute against a strategy, right? And that's, I think, an important point is, ultimately, again, I go back to, you should be able to explain your strategy in just a few sentences, right? Like, in here's example, it was, we're going to go after developers so we can get them using our services, long before they are needing them at commercial scale. When I was at T-Mobile, they were going through a massive change in strategy, and their strategy shifted to, we're gonna break apart the traditional way of doing business with subsidized phones, and we're going to just provide phones unsubsidized with the best possible service at the lowest possible price. And so, okay, low price, best service, again, that's not strategy. How were they doing it? They were doing it by taking the subsidy out of the overall phone and out of the service. And so, again, you've got to have some clear ways that you're doing it. But so again, it's what is the strategy is ultimately what it comes down to.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Let's get to my favorite part of our show, which is the rapid fire questions.
Okay.
All right, I got 5 for you today.
All right.
Just off the top of your head, what is your favorite guilty pleasure?
We're coming up on Halloween. It's those little fun size Almond Joys.
Oh man.
When my kids were young, none of the kids liked Almond Joys. So when I'd take them out trick-or-treating, they'd all bring me back. And if they got an Almond Joy, they'd all come back to me. So little Almond Joys. Oh, can't get enough of those.
Me too. I'm a big, anything with coconut in it. I'll go for it. Yeah. 2, what are you reading right now that, and would you recommend it?
So right now I'm reading a book called, came out a couple years ago, called From Strength to Strength. by, I think it's Albert Brooks. And so far I'm about halfway into it. I would recommend it. It's this really interesting approach to what got you great success in the first half of your career, for a variety of reasons, is not going to deliver the same level of success in the second half. And so kind of it speaks to me right now of like, okay, what is it that I'm trying to sort of move myself into in this later half of my career? So from strength to strength. And then another book, I'll give one other one if I can. I'm not usually a history guy, but I picked up a book that was recommended to me called Leadership in Turbulent Times. And it's by a historian. Her name is Doris Kearns Goodwin.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really cool. She goes into 3 points of the life of 4 of our presidents: Abraham Lincoln, Teddy Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, and Lyndon Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
And basically describes kind of what was happening in their life and how their leadership formed to and sort of evolved. And so it's this really cool book about how to become a really impactful leader, but as told through actual stories and historical context of these 4 presidents.
Interesting. Yeah, that sounds like one I'll definitely put a hold on. Okay, if you weren't doing this job, the one that you're in now, what's the most unusual job you might be doing instead?
Ooh. For years now, my oldest daughter and I have talked about starting a food truck.
What kind of
It's well, and that's the funny thing. It's a lot of things. Like, it's really good sandwiches. It's paninis. It's fresh fruit. It's breakfast. It's basically whatever she and I happen to be like, cooking a lot of. We're like, yeah, this is what our food truck should be. So it's kind of just a hodgepodge of stuff. So I don't know that it's a legitimate business I would actually pursue, but yeah, I would be running a food truck with her.
Cool. I like that. What's the weirdest or funniest habit you have that might surprise our viewers?
I'm a huge board game freak.
Mm.
I love board games, but the habit that I think is kind of weird is I love the smell of a new board game.
Yeah.
So when I open a new board game, I like to smell that smell of all the new pieces and new components. It's probably, various chemicals used in the manufacturing in China, so it's probably not good for me, but I love the smell of a new board game.
I could relate to that. It's like opening a new book or
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, for sure. Or a puzzle.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Puzzle seems like there's always like a little bit of like dustiness to that though. I don't
Yeah.
love it as much as a board game, but
Board game. Yeah, for sure.
teach them. Yeah.
Okay, last one. What's one fashion trend you're glad that has come back or you hope never does?
I'm a kid of the 80s. So I really hope we never ever ever have Miami Vice fashion come back. I feel like that might have been a very low point for us.
Yeah, yeah, I could see that.
So as long as the clothes that Don Johnson wore in that show stay in that show, I'm good. But that's
Yeah,
it.
nice. Fair enough. Cool. Michael, how are people able to find you, follow you, keep track of your work?
Yeah, the easiest place to track me down and find what I'm doing is at my website, which is breakapencil.com. So BreakaPencil, breakapencil.com. Or on LinkedIn, but breakapencil.com, that'll get you to my LinkedIn. That'll get you to, if you want to email me or schedule time or read stuff that I'm writing, that's the place to go.
And we were talking about what would a cool giveaway be? Something that we talked about today that might be helpful for a viewer. Anything pop to mind? Your
Like
your
a nugget of wisdom.
yeah, your 46-page definition of a strategy.
Yeah. So I'm gonna leave people with two. One is
Mhm.
strategy isn't what you say it is; it's what you spend your money on.
Nice.
And two, I think going back to kind of that freemium, if you're going to take on the big challenge of shifting your monetization model, make sure you're planning for success as well. Meaning, plan for what are you going to do 2, 3, 4 months from now when this is wildly successful, not just that initial launch. Make sure you're thinking ahead a little bit.
Nice. Nice. Michael, thank you so much for your time today. I will follow up with you and everyone out there watching. Check us out next week. I think Wes Bush is going to be on to talk about PLG, but don't quote me on that. So it should be a good show as well.
Excellent. Bye. Joshua, thank you for having me. I really had a good time.
Cheers.
Take care.